let's get into and let's take a look at my initial mock draft of the 2020 season. Like I said, this was done in August of 2019. And I had the Bengals with the first overall pick, and I had the Bengals taking Tua Tagovailoa with that number 1 pick. And it was clear going into last year's college football season, Tua was going to be the top rated, the top quarterback. We had tanked for Tua. Well, so it was only natural. And I think if Tua would have stayed healthy, he would have really pushed Joe Burrow for that number 1 spot. I think there would have been a discussion. I still think probably Burrow would have been that number 1 pick, but I think there would have been a little bit more discussion and intrigue of if the Bengals would take Tua. But I did have the Bengals finishing with the worst record. That was one of the 2 teams I had in their correct slot. And they ended up going with Burrow. I thought, and I think, like I said, if it wasn't for Tua's injuries, there would have been a discussion. Joe Burrow comes up and has this amazing season, shows these traits, so it's no surprise that he is number 1. All right, number 2, I had the Arizona Cardinals, and I had them taking Chase Young, the defensive end out of Ohio State. Now, I got Chase Young in the correct spot, just wrong team. Arizona Cardinals ended up finishing as a top 10 team, but I thought, Chase Young, at the time, he was my number 1 rated player. I thought he was the best player in the draft. He went from the minute I watched him to the actual draft, he was the best player. And the only reason why I said that he wouldn't be the first overall pick would be him with quarterback, and that's what ended up happening. At pick 3, I had the Miami Dolphins taking Justin Herbert, the quarterback out of Oregon. So that nearly happened. I know I projected that on my final mock draft. It didn't end up happening because they took Tua, which I think was a good pick. But Herbert was a guy that I thought was going to be a highly drafted prospect. I was a big fan of him from the get-go. His size, his athletic traits. I thought he was everything that Josh Allen is, but a more accurate passer. So, he ended up going to the Chargers. I think that's going to be a good scheme fit. I don't necessarily like their offensive coaching staff, but I think he's a guy that they don't have to put in right away. Dolphins, like I said, ended up getting Tua, same thing. A guy that they don't have to necessarily play right away and can continue his development. All right, pick 4, I had the New York Giants. This is where the Giants ended up picking. They ended up taking Andrew Thomas in the actual draft, but here I had him taking Jerry Jeudy, the wide receiver out of Alabama. I was a huge Jerry Jeudy fan, especially early on. I still like Jerry Jeudy. I still had him as like a top 12 prospect. He didn't end up going this high, but I thought the Giants, hey, they needed weapons for Daniel Jones, and they needed to go out and get them. Instead, they went with the offensive tackle, which by all means makes sense. So, is kind of the thought process there. At pick 5, I had the New York Jets taking A.J. Epinesa, the defensive end from Iowa. So, the Jets are another team that ended up picking a little bit later. They had that 11th overall pick. But I thought that they were a team that could really use that edge pass rusher. And in Greg Williams' defense, they tried to go out and get an Anthony Barr. They didn't have him. Greg Williams wants that edge pressure. And so I thought, hey, A.J. Epinesa is a guy that hadn't been a starter, but he was kind of having that Nick Bosa level progression in his career. Nick Bosa wasn't a starter until his junior year as well. And Epinesa was a guy that had had even better production than Nick Bosa. So I thought, hey, another continued progress. He would be able to come in and be this absolute stud, top 5 pick. Now, he didn't have as good of a season. I think some of his athletic traits got exposed a little bit. He wasn't the explosive guy off the edge that maybe we thought he could be. He ends up falling to the second round, going to the Buffalo Bills, but I think that was a good fit for him. The Bills are going to be a great system for him. The Jets ended up going with an offensive tackle, Mekhi Becton, who I think is a good fit for what they want to do. But, that's kind of where I had him going. All right, number 6, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I had them taking Grant Delpit, the safety out of LSU. Delpit was a guy that I thought, and I think a lot of people, you see a lot of early mock drafts, he was a top 10 prospect, and a lot of it was because he had such a tremendous sophomore year. I mean, he looked like the second coming of Jamal Adams. Just a rangy, big, athletic safety that can kind of fly around the field. But he struggled during his junior year. Injuries were a big part of that, and that caused him to fall down into the second round. But I thought at the time, having him go to Tampa Bay, Todd Bowles is a guy that likes safeties, he drafted Jamal Adams, he drafted Marcus May in one of his first drafts. The Bucs don't have a safety like Delbert, so that's kind of where I thought, no, Tampa Bay ends up signing Tom Brady. They have the 14th pick. They take Tristan Wirfs, so they have to be pretty happy with where they're going here. All right, pick 7. This is where I kind of had a big whiff. I had the Baltimore Ravens picking 7th overall, and I thought that the Ravens were not going to have a good season. And I just thought, hey, Lamar Jackson has shown a lot, but he's shown a lot as a runner. Teams are going to, how is he going to be able to come back from a lead? Well, it turned out he never really had a lead, and he flourished this year. So I had a big whiff there with the Ravens. But I had the Ravens taking Dylan Moses, the linebacker out of Alabama. And now, when I watched Dylan Moses, he was a guy that was just flashed on the field. I mean, he, to me, was, as I put in my writing, that Dylan Moses is arguably the best inside linebacking prospect that Nick Saban has had at Alabama. And that includes guys like C.J. Mosley, Dante Hightower, Rashad Evans. I mean, just guy after guy after guy. But I felt like Dylan Moses was the best out of all of those guys. Now, he ends up getting hurt, didn't play at all. He almost came out, but didn't. So he ended up going back to school. He's going to be a top 10 prospect if he checks out health-wise, I think. But I would have thought that he would have been a perfect fit. Now, the Ravens did end up going linebacker, but it was Patrick Queen, and it was at the end of the first round rather than the top 10. But it was definitely a position of Dean. At pick 8, I had the Washington Redskins taking Laviska Shenault, the wide receiver out of Colorado. Laviska Shenault's another guy similar to AJ Epinesa. Heading into the summer of 2019, there was a lot of hype. Laviska Shenault, as a sophomore at Colorado, really burst out on the scene and looked like a top 10 overall draft pick. However, injuries really caused him to miss time. He wasn't as successful, and he ended up falling into the second round. But I think he's a guy, if he can stay healthy, he's going to have a very good, successful career. I think he's, like I said, he's a top 10 prospect. I think he ended up grading out to me as a top 15 guy overall. But I didn't factor in injuries with that grade. And when I thought Washington take him in at 8, you just take Dwayne Haskins, get him a weapon. Terry McLaurin was good for them, or they had just drafted Terry McLaurin. He ends up being a good receiver for them, but getting that next guy now. And the Redskins did end up taking a receiver, just didn't happen to be Shenault. All right, number 9, I had the Buffalo Bills taking 9th. They ended up getting into the playoffs, so they didn't pick this early, and they ended up trading their first-round pick for Stephon Diggs. But I had them going Kayvon Chaisson in with this 9th pick. Another guy that as soon as I watched him, I was a fan of him. I probably had him too early. It's one of those things that's like, okay, I like Chaisson, but he had missed all of his sophomore year. So the clips that I had seen were from 2 years ago at the time. And so I should have, I'm critiquing a mock from August. But he's a guy that I should have said, hey, he's probably going to be later. He's probably not going to be a top 10 pick with his injury issues. But I said, if he's healthy, he is a top 10 pick. And he didn't stay healthy during his career. But he ends up going 20th overall to the Jaguars. Still a top 20 pick. But I think he's going to be a guy, like I said, I probably had him just a little too early, but because of injuries. All right, pick 10, I had the Jacksonville Jaguars taking CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma. Lamb was another guy that I was a big fan of initially, and I thought Jacksonville could utilize and need some receiver help. Now, they ended up taking Laviska Shenault later on in the second round in the actual draft. But here I thought, hey, go out and get a guy that can win at contested catches. The Jaguars had built their receivers up with speed and to play off play action. They need someone that their quarterback can go up, and I thought he could be Nick Foles' version of Alshon Jeffrey. Well, Nick Foles is gone. They got Jay Gruden in as their offensive coordinator. Now, like I said, they went wide receiver later on. CeeDee Lamb ended up falling to the Cowboys at pick 17, but I thought back then, once again, he was a top 10 player in this class. All right, pick 11, I had the Oakland Raiders taking Derek Brown, the defensive tackle out of Auburn. And my thoughts on Derek Brown really didn't change. I kind of always viewed him as, hey, he's a first-round player, but I feel more comfortable having him drafted in the teens. No, he went 7th overall. I know I was further down than the consensus. The consensus had him as a top 10 pick, had him as the best defensive tackle in this draft. I thought, hey, I like him a lot, but I worry about his ability to be a pass rusher in the NFL. Well, we'll see how he develops, kind of like Dexter Lawrence the year before. The Giants took him top 20, and he had a good year. Not a huge pass rusher, but he showed some potential. So I think Derek Brown was a better version of Dexter Lawrence. So I'll be curious to see how he does in Carolina. But here I thought he'd be a good inside presence next to Maurice Hurst and to help out that defensive line. All right, 12. I had the Green Bay Packers picking 12th, and I had them taking Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle out of Iowa. I thought, hey, there's a team that could utilize some help all on that right-hand side. Bulaga was entering his final year. He's gone. He's with the Chargers now. And I thought, hey, Tristan Wirfs would be a guy to come in right away at right tackle, help protect Aaron Rodgers. Well, the Packers ended up having a good year. They picked down at the bottom of the draft. They ended up taking trading up and taking a quarterback here. He, like I said, I thought Tristan Wirfs, this is right around his range. Wirfs ended up going, I believe, 14 to the... Now, even on 13 to the Buccaneers, so I just missed him by a pick. But he was a guy that I was a big fan of. At this time, he was my number one offensive lineman in this class. I thought he was a plug-and-play right tackle. I think he's going to be that still. Come in for the Bucs, boom, right tackle, protect Tom Brady. All right, pick 13, I had the Detroit Lions taking defensive tackle Justin Madubuike. From Texas A&M. He ended up being a second-round pick to the Houston Texans, but I thought, hey, the Lions could use some defensive tackle help. A'Shawn Robinson and Damon Harrison, they've got those two guys. Mike Daniels was another guy that they signed to a one-year deal, but Robinson and Daniels were going to be free agents, and Harrison has a huge contract. They end up cutting Harrison, if I'm not mistaken, but I know A'Shawn Robinson's gone, and so I thought, hey, Justin Madubuike come in. I was, once again, another guy that when I watched him initially, I was a huge fan of him. Big, he was a former defensive end that they bulked up and moved him into a 3 technique, and he really still kept a lot of those athletic traits, but kind of developed more power too. And so I thought, hey, he could be a guy that's maybe a fast riser in the draft process, a strong year, could really elevate him. Now, he ended up being a second-round pick, and a lot of people liked him. But he definitely wasn't a top 15 pick. And the Lions ended up having the 3rd overall pick, took a cornerback in Jeffrey Okudah. So kind of a different direction that they went into. All right, pick 14, I had the Denver Broncos taking Paulson Adebo, for the cornerback from Stanford. And he ended up going back to school. So he's now the second player that I had initially in this mock that wasn't even in the 2020 draft. And my thought process between him, it was that the Broncos and Vic Fangio he's always kind of added a cornerback where he's been. He's always had big, tall corners, and Adebo is a 6'1" corner, physical guy. I thought he could be their version of Kyle Fuller, kind of maybe like an Aqib Talib for them, and be that physical presence. Now, obviously, Adebo went back to school, and he's right now my top-rated cornerback in the that I've watched. But I think he's still a first-round prospect. But the Broncos ended up going offense heavy rather than loading up the defense. I kind of like that, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think Adebo's definitely got to watch for this 2021 class. All right, pick 15. I had the San Francisco 49ers taking T. Higgins, the wide receiver out of Clemson. Now, it's funny. I thought the 49ers would have around that 15th pick. They ended up going to the Super Bowl, so I was off there. But they ended up having the 13th overall pick, so not too far off from here. They ended up taking Javon Kinlaw with that pick. I didn't have Kinlaw going in this draft. I don't think I had really seen. I think it was a little. I did have him going. Scratch that. I had him going later on in this draft, but I thought, hey, the 49ers could utilize a receiver. And at the time, I thought, hey, Higgins could be their version of Julio Jones. And my first viewing of Higgins, I was all in on him. I thought he showed a similar playing style to Julio Jones. I never thought he was going to be a Julio Jones level player, but I saw that big physical type of power receiver, and I thought, hey, Kyle Shanahan doesn't have his version of that. They just had drafted Deebo Samuel. They had just drafted Jalen Hurd. And I thought, hey, maybe Higgins can be, Kyle Shanahan had a lot of success with Julio down in Atlanta. He had a lot of success with Josh Gordon. So I said, let's give him T. Higgins here. Now, Higgins ends up going in the early second round. And the 49ers ended up going receiver, but they went with Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State, who I didn't have in this mock draft. And I thought, and they went more of the speed route, because at the time, we hadn't seen Deebo with the 49ers, and he ended up developing into that physical, out of the slot, but that physical type receiver for them. So they were going into the 2020 NFL draft looking for speed. I thought they were going to maybe take Henry Ruggs at 13th. He wasn't available. They ended up trading up to get Brandon Ayuk with their true first round pick. And so this is one of those things that we didn't have the information, but I thought Higgins would have been a good fit for what they were wanting to do. All right, pick 16, I had the Carolina Panthers taking Xavier McKinney, the safety out of Alabama. I went with rumors heading into the 2019 draft that they were looking at safety, and I said, okay, well, there's heavy rumors that they're going to go safety, so why not? They didn't get a safety in the draft. They just added free agents. They had Trey Boston. They had Eric Reed. Hey, they're probably going to look to go safety here. And McKinney was a guy that I liked, a true free safety at the time, and there's not a lot of those from what I had seen, so I thought, hey, perfect fit. Now, McKinney ended up being more of a chess piece for Alabama, and I know in the LSU game he lined up in the box a lot. He lined up as a slot corner, and he's got this potential. And he ended up going in the second round to the Giants. I like that fit. And the Panthers, they picked 7, Derek Brown, but they ended up taking Kyle Duggar. So they did go safety early on, not Kyle Duggar, Jeremy Chin, but it was more of a strong safety rather than a guy like McKinney who was more of true of a free. All right, at 17, I had the Houston Texans taking Tyler Biadasz, the center out of Wisconsin. At the time, Biadasz was a guy that I had watched, and I just saw him overpower Nebraska defense, and maybe I should have taken that with a grain of salt. And I thought, okay, here's the top center in the draft. He's a guy that's got potential to be an elite center, and those elite centers tend to go in the first round. We had Cesar Ruiz end up going in the first round of the actual draft. But Biadasz didn't end up going until day 3, so he was my first guy that I had going in the first round that ended up being a day 3 pick. I think looking back at this, I should have seen, he's not an super athletic guy. Injuries were a big reason why he ended up falling. I think he probably could have been a higher pick. Maybe it would have been like a 3rd or 4th round pick if he hadn't been kind of banged up or concerns about his injuries. But I thought Houston, hey, they needed to improve their offensive line. They had drafted Titus Howard. They had drafted Max Sharpering. They could utilize a center in there. Now, Houston ended up trading away their first-round pick to get Laramie Tunsil. So they did end up using their first-round pick to improve the offensive line, but it wasn't a center, and it wasn't a center that got drafted in the 5th round. All right, at pick 18, I had the Tennessee Titans taking Jeffrey Okudah, the cornerback out of Ohio State. I think Titans fans would have been ecstatic if Jeffrey Okudah would have gone to the Tennessee Titans, but he ended up going 3rd overall. Was a big fan of him. My write-up, I said Okudah is a fantastic athlete who has effortless speed to go along with good size and fluidity. He has the makings of a shutdown corner. Well, he ended up in his junior season just completely just blowing up. Ends up, he was like my second or third rated player in this class. I think he was my second rated player. He ends up going third overall to the Detroit Lions. Tennessee ends up having a magical run in the playoffs. They pick at the end of the first round. They ended up taking an offensive tackle, but in round 2, they did take Christian Fulton. So they did go cornerback early, and I thought, hey, with Logan Ryan, I didn't think they might not re-sign him, so that's why they went corner. And hey, Logan Ryan's still out on the free agent market. All right, pick 19, Seattle Seahawks. I had him taking Trayvon Diggs, the cornerback out of Alabama. I think this is one of those things that's like, hey, Trayvon Diggs is a big physical press man corner. Seattle has had big physical press man corners. Hey, let's just put the 2 and 2 together. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. And Diggs ended up going in the second round to the Cowboys. And the Seahawks ended up taking a linebacker in the first round. So Seattle's always a wild card. They always seem to surprise a lot of people with their first round picks. In this case, they did. But Diggs was another guy that didn't end up going in the first round. I think, once again, some concerns maybe about injuries, overall speed could be a part of that. And Seattle seemed to be happy with their cornerbacks early, so they ended up taking one. All right, pick 20, the Minnesota Vikings. I had them going to the playoffs. I had them just missing out on the playoffs, but they not only went to the playoffs, but won. They ended up having 2 picks in the actual draft. And I had him, in this case, at 20, taking Walker Little, the offensive tackle out of Stanford. And Walker Little ended up going back to school. So this is my third guy that I had in this draft that went back to school. I thought he was a natural fit for what the Vikings wanted to do with their offensive line, a zone blocking scheme. And they had just drafted Garrett Bradbury, and there was talk that maybe they were going to go after Andre Dillard. They passed on him for Bradbury. But left tackle was still kind of a need. Riley Reif was there. He was manageable. But there was some rumor that they wanted to move him inside to guard. And so I thought, hey, Walker Little is an athletic left tackle. He'd be perfect in that zone blocking scheme. Put him in there. Move Reif down to guard. Ready to go. Now, the Vikings ended up doing something similar to that, but they did in the second round with Ezra Cleveland, who is a left tackle. I don't know if he'll compete for that left tackle spot day one and compete, and if he wins it, they'll move Reif down. But they did a similar thing just in the second round, and obviously Walker Little went back to school. He's going to be a guy that's probably going to be in my initial 2021 mock draft. But he's another guy that I'm glad he went back to school, because I think he has some stuff that he needs to get. He needs to get a little bit stronger and show better balance. But I did say he had top 10 potential. So, all right, pick 21 is the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, I was one of those people that went in on the Cleveland Browns and thought, hey, maybe they can make a playoffs. They had loaded up this team. Baker Mayfield had shown potential. Now, Freddie Kitchen did. Baker didn't have a good of a season. They ended up having the 10th overall pick. They ended up going offensive tackle, and they took Jedrick Wills. But I had him taking offensive tackle Andrew Thomas here. Andrew Thomas is a guy that when I watched him initially, I wasn't blown away. I had seen all these people rank him as a top 5 pick, and I just didn't quite see it. He ended up being he kind of rose a little bit in the process, but he ended up being my 4th rated tackle. But I thought Thomas would have been a good fit for the Browns, who need a left tackle with Joe Thomas gone. Move Andrew Thomas in there, and you kind of solidify that offensive line. And they ended up taking, like I said, Jedrick Wills, and they want him to do the same thing for them. But when I made this, it wasn't Kevin Stefanski and that regime making this pick. It was Freddie Kitchens and that their old front office. So the zone blocking scheme and the athletic ability didn't necessarily play in. So. But Thomas ended up being the 4th overall pick to the New York Giants. All right, pick 22, Pittsburgh Steelers. I had him taking C.J. Henderson from Florida. Now the Steelers didn't end up having their first round pick. They traded to the Dolphins for Minka Fitzpatrick, and the Steelers but C.J. Henderson did end up being a top 10 pick. He ended up going to the Jacksonville Jaguars at pick 9. I was a big fan of him. I think the only reason why I had him going in the 20s is he was a little bit smaller in stature, not as physical. But I thought, hey, the Steelers could use more man-to-man cover guys, and Henderson may lack great size, but he makes up with explosive movement skills, and they're perfect for what the Steelers want. Henderson was a guy I had him as a 11th rated prospect at the time, so I was a little surprised I moved him down to the 22. But he, like I said, he ended up going 9th overall, and he's maybe not the best tackler, maybe not the most physical, but his explosive traits, his movement traits, are why he got picked in the top 10. All right, pick 23, I had the Dallas Cowboys. I had them taking Albert O from Missouri, Oklahoma, and he ended up going in on day 3, so he was one of those day 3 guys, and he ended up going to the Denver Broncos. But I thought at the time he looked like at 6'5", 255 pounds. He's a large tight end, but showed sneaky athletic traits, bit raw. But I thought once again he could continue to develop. He didn't have similar situation to others. Didn't really have the best year going forward, and kind of got lost in the shuffle. I think not having Drew Lock really hurt him. Now he gets to reunite with Drew Lock in Denver. But I thought Dallas, they had brought back Jason Witten, but they needed to get younger at the position. And I thought, hey, Albert O would be a good guy to come in and fill. And the Cowboys, ended up going with CeeDee Lamb at the 17th overall pick. At pick 24, I had the Los Angeles Rams taking Raekwon Davis, the defensive tackle out of Alabama. And I had him filling in Ndamukong Suh's spot. Suh left and went to the Buccaneers last year, and the Rams really didn't truly replace him. So I thought, hey, after not having him for a year, let's get Davis, a guy that, 6'6", 315 pounds, is a guy that can kind of do multiple things. I wasn't a big fan of Raekwon Davis, but I thought he was a guy that would still go in the first round. Now, he ended up being a day 2 pick, and he ended up going to the Miami Dolphins. I didn't love that pick just because I didn't think he was worth a day 2 pick when it was all said and done. But just like the reason why I had him going 24th here, and the reason why he went in the second round, is I thought teams would like him better than I did, and obviously the Dolphins did. Pick 25, I had the Atlanta Falcons taking Bryce Hall, the cornerback out of Virginia. Bryce Hall, during his the 2018 season, he led the nation in pass breakups, and he was a guy that maybe wasn't the most explosive athletically, but long arms, had a feel for the position, had enough speed, and he was always just kind of right there to be able to make a play for the ball. Now, I don't know if Hall would have ever been a true first-round pick, but he got hurt during the 2019 season, so there were injury concerns. It ended up being a day 3 pick, and he's a day 3 pick just because of injuries. Now, he probably, if healthy, would have been more of a day 2 pick, I think. But I thought Atlanta would be a good fit for him here at 25. Falcons ended up not making the playoffs. They ended up taking a cornerback similar to Bryce Hall in A.J. Terrell, another guy that's bigger, physical, and long. Now, Terrell was a lot faster than Bryce Hall, but very similar skill set to him. All right, pick 26. I had the Indianapolis Colts picking here, and I had them taking Javon Kinlaw, the defensive tackle out of South Carolina. Now, it's fitting. The funny thing about this pick is I had the Colts taking Javon Kinlaw at pick 26. Well, the Colts ended up trading the 13th overall pick to the San Francisco 49ers for DeForest Buckner. And who do the 49ers take at pick 14 because they traded back one pick? But who do they pick with the Colts pick? Javon Kinlaw to replace DeForest Buckner. So it's kind of funny that I had the two kind of intermixed between each other. A very similar skill set, 6'6", Javon Kinlaw 6'6", DeForest Buckner 6'7", more physical guys at the point of attack. I had compared Kinlaw to a Jerry Tillery, who went to the Chargers at the end of the 2019 NFL draft. I thought Kinlaw, whereas I wasn't as high on him in the summer, but I think he really took that next step during his senior year, ended up being a top 10, 15 pick. I had him rated as a top 10 player overall. I thought the Colts at 13 very well could have taken him, but they traded for Buckner, and the team that they traded for him took Kinlaw here. All right, pick 27, I had the Philadelphia Eagles taking Isiah Simmons, the linebacker out of Clemson. I think when I made this mock, I had Isiah Simmons go here just because I thought he was a first-round pick, and I didn't really know where to put him. And I said, hey, Eagles are a team that likes taking weapons on defense, and put him in there. And at the time, I still kind of I had him as a linebacker still, and I thought, hey, Jim Schwartz, they like to have. They've had a lot of veterans. They like guys that can go kind of fly around. So I thought Simmons would be a good fit. Now the Eagles ended up taking a wide receiver in Jalen Reagor, and Simmons ended up being a top 10 pick. He goes to the Cardinals at pick 8 and is going to be kind of a weapon for him. And Simmons was good during his sophomore year, but during his junior year, he completely blew up and just showed the elite playmaking traits that made him a top 10 overall pick. At pick 28, I have the Chargers taking Jake Fromm, the quarterback out of Georgia. Now, I kind of kick myself for this, and no offense to Jake Fromm, but I didn't. When I watched Jake Fromm, even when I was watching Georgia prospects for the 2019 draft, Jake Fromm did not stand out. So when I watched him, I wasn't a big fan of him. I did not see a first-round pick like a lot of people did, and I thought I kind of had him as a third, fourth round grade. So I probably shouldn't have put him in here. But I think I put him in here, and it's easy for me to say now because he ended up being like a fifth round pick to the Buffalo Bills and didn't have that great of a junior season. But I thought, okay, teams are going to like him better. And so that's kind of why I put him in there. I kind of kicked myself for doing so. But I had him go to the Chargers, had him taking a quarterback to kind of sit behind Phillip Rivers for maybe a year. Maybe they re-signed Rivers for another year. In this situation, they had made the playoffs, made a deep run, and thought, okay, Fromm could kind of be be a guy that they develop into that starter, kind of fit their dink and dunk and run heavy offense. Well, Chargers ended up struggling this year. Pick 6, took Justin Herbert, and Fromm, like I said, goes on day 3. I think Fromm will be a solid backup in this league, but he doesn't have starting traits. I should have seen that back then, even back then. All right, pick 29, I had the Oakland Raiders. This is the pick from Chicago in the Khalil Mack trade. I had him taking Creed Humphrey, the center from Oklahoma. Now, I made this pick, and I think it was a lot of like, hey, I really like Creed Humphrey, and I think he could be a first-round pick. He ended up going back to school. He would have been probably my number 1 rated interior offensive lineman. And so I think I just kind of tried to fit him into the first round here and thought, oh, hey, the Raiders could use a center. And they got Rodney Hudson. They would pay him a high salary. But what I forgot that the Raiders don't need a center. Rodney Hudson is a stud. He's going to be there for a while. So it's kind of a bad pick for me, not only because Creed Humphrey went back to school. That's not the bad pick, but the Raiders didn't need a center. They obviously didn't attack one in free agency. They didn't draft one. So that was a bad pick for me overall. All right, pick 30. The Kansas City Chiefs. I had them taking a cornerback and Christian Fulton, and it's one of those things that, like, hey, I thought they were going to go in and get a cornerback for a position of need and kind of load up on some young guys in that situation. Instead, Fulton ends up going to the end of the second round to the Tennessee Titans. The Titans get a good value there. I thought Fulton in that day 2 range, when it was all said and done, was a good fit for him. But I just thought the Chiefs here would want some help on defense. They've got the offense pieces in place. They obviously won the Super Bowl. They kind of load up some young players on defense to kind of help them out. Now, they end up going running back and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was a perfect fit, but I don't think anyone would have faulted them if they did take a cornerback there. All right, last couple picks. Pick 31, I had the New Orleans Saints taking Henry Ruggs. Henry Ruggs, once again, this might be a common theme. I wasn't not a big fan of him initially. I liked him, don't get me wrong. But the more I watched him during the 2020 season, the more I truly appreciate his, not only his elite athletic traits, but his more nuanced game than what he maybe had. But I thought, hey, the Saints, they could use a safety or a wide receiver. And they could be a team that goes out. They've got Michael Thomas. They drafted Traquan Smith, who really hadn't panned out. But so get Ruggs in there, and can you imagine Ruggs in this offense? Well, they ended up signing Emmanuel Sanders, so they kind of fulfilled that role to begin with. But Ruggs was clearly gone. Ruggs ended up going 12th overall to the Raiders and gives them a true playmaker, so he wasn't even available for the Saints. I think it would have been hard for the Saints to get Ruggs because I think so many teams wanted him. That's why he went early. But like I said, the Saints, they went out and they got Emmanuel Sanders, kind of filled that second role, so wide receiver wasn't that big of a need. All right, and rounding out my initial 2020 mock draft at 32, I had the New England Patriots. I had him taking Patty Fisher, the linebacker out of Northwestern. Ended up going back to school. He was only a redshirt junior, so he still had another year. I thought, hey, the Patriots, they have some solid guys at linebacker, but they don't have that elite. Dante Hightower is still good, but he's kind of narrowing down at the end of his career. So I thought Fisher would be a guy to come in, and he just seemed like a Patriots type of player. And he's a good athlete, but not great. Just knows how to make tackles, and he was just kind of a tackling machine. So I thought Bill Belichick would be a big fan of him. Like I said, he ends up going back. I think he's more at this point a day 2 player, but like I said, I thought the Patriots would be a guy that kind of fits well with him. All right, so wrapping it up, like I said, out of the 32 guys I had in my initial initial mock draft first round, 14 of them ended up being first round picks. 5 out of the so out of those 18 remaining, 5 of them did go back to school. So now the 13 left. 4 out of those 13 were day 3 picks. So I had 9 picks that were day 2. So 9 of the 32 guys listed here end up being day 2 picks. I didn't make a correct pick to the team, so no one who I had mocked actually went to that team. But I did have 2 teams in the correct slot. The Cincinnati Bengals, I did successfully project them to have the number 1 overall pick. And the New York Giants, I did successfully project them to have the 4th overall pick. So hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on YouTube, you subscribe and give it a like there. If you're listening to this on the podcast, make sure that you subscribe, rate, and review. And let me know what you think. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I've really been trying to step up my Instagram. So that's all at draft_Brian. The YouTube channel is at draft_Brian. If you like what you see and you want to help out, go to Patreon/draft_Brian. Contribute that way. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.